Good afternoon and welcome to this episode of LevelUp Cyber Live. My name is Tony Bryan and I am your host and Executive Director of CyberUp. Very excited about today's discussion. Have a little bit of a homer pick with today's guest, but very excited to hear from Alan Berry. So welcome, Alan.
Thanks, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here.
So for those that don't know you, I'd love take a few seconds and introduce yourself.
Sure. So I am the Chief Information Security Officer for Centene Corporation here in the St. Louis area. I'm also the president of the board for CyberUp. So I'm the standby when Tony needs somebody to talk. I'm always available. So I'm free. I got into this role after doing just shy of 26 years in the Air Force, which is where I learned cyber as a trade and came up through the ranks that way. And the Air Force in particular really embraces the apprenticeship model. So that's part of why CyberUp is also my passion project.
So the topic for today is keys to higher entry level. And so, we've had the pleasure of working the last couple of years with Centene. And I've shared this story time and time again with other employers and other partners, but Alan and his team have done an incredible job of building out what I would say pathways, for their organization. So we're gonna dive in a little bit more to that and make sure we focus in on the concept of, yes, Centene is large, right? Fortune 24, how many $billion a year?
144.5 billion for 22.
So big company, but for those that maybe aren't part of a large company like Centene, the system and process and some of the recommendations we're going to talk about are universal, right? And they're applicable for everybody. And I honestly have only seen this done twice, Centene being one, and one other one was a smaller kind of managed security service provider organization that had mapped it out. So let's just dive in. So I'd love for you to share with the group, what things you did at Centene to really build out an environment or maybe just a culture that was supportive of kind of all spectrums, but specifically to higher entry level hiring.
Sure. So the big issue that we did was first we went through all the job descriptions that were here when I showed up, and we downsized a lot of the expectations. A lot of folks, they never revisit those job descriptions. They just assume that they're still good, that they haven't spent any time managing those. And we took things out like bachelor's degree required or advanced certs or 3 to 5 years experience. And we very intentionally decided that certain roles are the entry points into our organization. You can't only buy talent. You have to build some of your talent. You have to build for the future. You have to build for the community. And when you're a big enough company like Centene, then you can afford to do that and have that focus. And so we chose to go through the process, make things like bachelor's degrees desired or preferred, but not required, and make sure that all the truly entry-level positions were clearly marked as 0 to 2 years experience, not 3 to 5. And that's really so that the recruiters don't filter people out, because the recruiters are doing their job. They're looking at resumes. They're trying to see who needs to be interviewed, who's qualified for the position we're trying to hire. And if you have in there 3 to 5 years experience and the applicant says, well, I'm just graduating from college or I'm just getting out of an apprentice program, they just cull them out and they never even get to a hiring manager. So you never get to see that talent. And then the other big thing we did is, with that intentional designation that certain roles are the entry-level positions, we created pathways to get off of that team into other more advanced skill sets across the CISO teams so that we could constantly have that flow. We wanted to be able to create a churn internally where people work those entry-level jobs for a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, whatever their personal progression and skill set really dictated, and then identify where they can go next inside the company, where they could mature and grow and continue to expand their skill sets.
So one of the things that I think there were ripple effects, right, to this exercise that you guys did. Do you want to speak to some of those ripple effects? I'm thinking around just, your hiring managers, your talent acquisition. There were secondary things that came from the effort and work you guys did for your job functions. I'd love to maybe share that with others. That'd be great.
Yeah, one big effect was convincing hiring managers this was okay. They have a tendency to want to hire the higher level, more experienced talent because it's also easy to view that if this person is less capable, if they take more time to get spun up and become fully functional in the job, that it reflects poorly on them. So you have to really clarify with the hiring managers that no, I expect you to have a certain number of junior analysts, junior technicians that are still learning the skills. You also have to set aside some time in that apprenticeship mindset that says there's some mentorship requirements here. We know there's mentorship requirements. We're not going to shy away from those. A lot of folks, when they first start out, aren't going to understand the full breadth of their role, and they're going to have a lot of questions and they're going to have some struggles, and that's okay. You have to give that room for them to have those struggles so that they can grow and mature and expand their horizons. On the recruiter side, or really the financial side, there's some upsides to this. If I'll just make up some numbers, but if you have 10 people on a team, which would be a pretty large team, and you want all of them to be a senior analyst level, that's pretty expensive. But you really only need a certain percentage of those, depending on your mission, your cycles, whatever your individual characteristics of your positions. If you could get away with maybe 5 or 6 or senior analysts, and some are junior analysts learning the trade and being mentored, they're also, they're lower priced talent. So you save some money for the company if you have enough headroom to make that space available.
I know for me, it's been, we've worked with many of the managers at Centene, and everybody has been so welcoming and just excited about the opportunity because the framework, we'll call it a framework, the framework of job descriptions and job requirements, I think to me supported buy-in across your entire organization and really supported buy-in from your internal team and also for your talent acquisition folks because it set a standard right around what right looks like and what your expectations as a leader of the organization would be. What advice would you give? Maybe I'm not a Fortune 24 company or I'm a smaller to mid-sized company that is struggling with my recruitment, maybe struggling with retention. I know we've all seen the statistics of burnout. What advice would you give to them? To take maybe that first step and really look ahead into good best practices in hiring.
Well, I think retention is one of those big keys. And we created this thing we call the career ladder that maps all the roles across the team. And as we've grown over the last 5.5 years, that's now dozens and dozens of roles that are distinctly different. And each role has levels of expertise. When we created that career ladder, that mapping to show where you could go next, it helps with retention because now that person who was your entry level analyst working your incident response team and has done 2 or 3 years in that role, they're thinking about, well, I really want to do threat intel or threat hunt, or I really like the machines more than I like the process. So I want to go be a firewall engineer or a security architect. They need to see that it's achievable. They need to see that there is a path to get there. And that career ladder lays it out nice and clean that says, here's the skills we think you should master in order to be competitive for this position. Here's the certifications that we value in that position. Here's the training we're willing to pay for. And not just nighttime training on your own, but we'll put aside time during the workday when you're being paid by us to do this training to get yourself competitive. And so that ability to see that in your own company helps with that retention versus getting dissatisfied with, I've been on nights for 2 years, nobody likes me, I think I'm going to go try to find a job somewhere else. And every recruiter in the world will tell you that it's much, much cheaper to train the people you have than to continually have to go find and train new people and acclimatize them to your own culture.
Well, I remember last year Centene as a whole made a conscious decision, right? You took a step back and looked at your kind of current salaries and payroll and benchmarked how they were in other, across other organizations, and that had there was a cost associated with it, but for you guys, it was a large retention point, right? Like, if you want to, share that with the listeners too, would be great.
Yeah, it was a big inflection point for us, and we're still working on that journey. In fact, it's a long journey. It's not something you just do in a couple of weeks. But as we grew and as we got more professional, more formalized in our security team structure, we outgrew the previous organizational views. So I could no longer have just you're a security engineer as a job description, or you're a manager of information security as a job description, because I couldn't find the right talent with that. I needed to be more specific. I needed to be able to say you're manager of, firewalls, or you're the manager of the threat intel team. And as we got those job descriptions more formalized, that allowed us to benchmark against industry. And there's dozens of different groups that will help you with that benchmarking. Some will charge you, some will give it to you for free. But you can benchmark the competitive salaries, the expectations, and we pulled most of the job skills right off the NIST framework, that they published. So we didn't have to go create those or pay for those. They're free on the NIST website. And that helped us right size our pay and make it competitive with our peers.
Which I've met lots of mid to senior level folks over the last 7 years, and I have yet to hear somebody who just arbitrarily left for more money. Right? There are those people, right? I'm not saying that's the more generally would leave an organization primarily around opportunities that would be afforded them for job functions, right? Like where they would want to go. So I think that part, for you guys to take some time and assess and benchmark against salaries, I think goes a long way at just around retention and having to go out and then finding highly skilled people that mid to senior level talent. So I'm going to go.
We do have some that leave for money. So it does happen because there are certain parts of our industry that will pay handsomely, and the tech industry. But if you also notice in the last 2 or 3 months, a lot of those same companies have been laying people off. So they have a lot of volatility. So yeah, there's a certain amount of loyalty that you can build up with your team. Reward them as much as you can and as appropriately as you can, but you'll get that loyalty by doing that, and they will stay through those periods when other companies are, they're doubling salaries, but a year later they're laying you off. So you just have to be really careful with that dynamic and, look before you leap. But you're right. Most of the time when people leave, it's because they're dissatisfied with their leadership, their resourcing, something else. Pay is not generally the only reason.
So I'm gonna go a little rogue here because you had a front row seat for your son to watch him, navigate some of this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you got to see it firsthand with somebody that was coming out of a college program or an apprenticeship program, and the struggles, right, that they had to really to break into that first role, and it's a challenge. What advice would you give, based off of those experiences to individuals that are maybe looking at a graduation from college here in the next few months, or wrapping up a boot camp or wrapping up a pre-apprenticeship program, for how they would jump into this?
Yeah, it's really difficult to break through, even when companies are really good at setting up entry-level jobs and changing their job descriptions, because there is a lot of competition for those spots. So like my son had to work a while just to get an honest job interview. And it was partly because of the same problems that I discussed earlier with hiring managers just not taking care of their job descriptions. Things were listed as entry level with 3 to 5 years experience and a CISSP required. Like, that makes no sense whatsoever. So you just plow through all those, and you have to just ignore them because obviously that company's not really thinking about entry level jobs. But it really came down to networks. It was somebody said, oh, let me introduce you to company X. And all of a sudden that week he had 2 job offers after going months without even being able to get real interviews and doing pickup work and gig work, trying to just make ends meet. So my advice to folks, whether they're coming up through an apprentice program like CyberUp or through a college program, is try your very best to get some work experience early that's in the field, that's relevant. Whether that's an internship while you're in college, whether that's going through something like CyberUp, where we help people get those first jobs as apprentices, get that work experience, something that helps you get past the first level of recruiter. I think we've all been there where it's like, hey, I saw an ad, you're looking for people. Oh yeah, just go online and apply. Well, that's just junk. It's our unfortunate reality, but it's junk for the individual, because even when my kids were trying to get jobs at like Home Depot or Target, big signs in the parking lot, and yet not a single soul there would give you a job application or talk to you. You had to go online and apply. And I have no idea why my camera continues to refocus.
Well, it's, I think to your point, 17-year-olds are expected to have resumes in 2023, which is crazy to me to think that, I walked in and shook a hand and got a job. So it's just changed. And that's a great segue for kind of the next question. So, like, I know we've talked to lots of companies out there, and some employers are getting several hundred resumes for a job posting, and some organizations, I talked to one last week, are getting 4, right? And so those are 2 very different economies of scale, and I think two approaches are going to be applied differently in those scenarios, right? What would you recommend for maybe companies that are getting? What advice would you give for those companies that are getting not very many resumes and applicants, so where they can look beyond that? And we'll hit the second one in the next question.
It'd be interesting to know, for the companies not getting a lot of applicants, what they're doing to recruit. I know that my experience with large companies has been that we always thought people showed up at our door. We just needed to put it on our job board on the public internet, and the world would show up and want a job with us. And that is no longer true. It's an employee's market to a large degree. And so you have to go and be active on your recruiting efforts. Kind of just anecdotal evidence, when we've done that and allowed our recruiters to be passive, we've struggled to get applicants. But instead, when leaders on my team take those same jobs, do a very short LinkedIn post, nothing fancy, saying, hey, we're looking for this person. If you know them, tag them in this posting. We get dozens. I was hiring for a fairly senior position in one of our subsidiaries last year, and in 48 hours, I had 95 applicants. So the demand's out there. People want the jobs, but you got to get the word out. And there's lots of different resources you can use out there. Some of them paid, some of them free, but you got to get the word out and not be passive and just think that people will come to your personal job site.
So the flip of that would be, I'm an organization that gets several hundred, right? What advice would you give for those companies of how do you ensure you're not overlooking smart, bright candidates that would be part of that hiring process?
I think that's the harder side of it. When I had the 95 applicants, luckily I had a really good recruiter working with me on that one. So he was able to get it down to 30 resumes that he thought I should look at. And I asked him to open it up that wide. Normally he would have said, no, I'm going to give you 6. I said, no, give me like 30. And then I read 30 resumes because, as a professional in this career field, I can read a resume for one of my positions, and in 3 or 4 minutes, I can tell you if the person's qualified or not. Just 34 years of experience doing this. It's harder for the recruiter if they're not a technical recruiter, if they're not a cybersecurity recruiter in particular. But that's the harder problem in my mind. What I would love to do is have skills qualification testing. And there are some groups out there that offer that, but you have to check with your company to see if your company will allow you to do that. Because once you start down that path, you may have to do that for every single applicant, not just the ones you've screened and said you want to test. You may have to do it for every single person that applies. Depends how your HR and legal department looks at it, I guess. But that would be the ideal for the skills related jobs. Is here's the test. Prove to me that you actually understand the responsibilities and the skills that are required.
Do you have a particular framework? So in that scenario, from a skills assessment, what do you hyper focus that on a specific job that you'd be targeting, or do you keep it broad around just being a technologist that with a cyber spin?
I prefer to focus it myself, but that's hard because then you have to have, if you've got 24 work roles, then you'd have to have 24 different assessments, and that is a nightmare to maintain. So you really have to rely on third parties, and there are several outfits out there that do training and testing that you can use in that manner, so you can modify it a little bit or just focus it in the right areas. We did try it out, had mixed results. It wasn't the best result. I was hoping that it would be a little easier and a little friendlier, but I would say it was only a moderate, a C on the return from it. So we stopped doing it. If we could ever fix that, that'd be the way to do it.
So I'm going to ask a Homer question here around just the CyberUp relationship we've had with Centene, because I think, and I hope you agree, that we've had some great success, right? Over we did a cohort a couple of years ago, and we started another one last week. For all those that have tuned in, I'd love to just dive into how, I'll say, why you found value in that. And this was, and just for everybody's record, this was pre-board stuff with Alan, right? It helped, but it was, there were some of these conversations and that were in the works. But, maybe describe how that looked for you guys in Centene, and what some of the value and maybe return on investment you guys got out of that partnership.
Well, there were a couple of different dimensions to it. One, there was a certain amount of give back to society. Centene as a company has a pretty big commitment to our communities. So I wanted to live that personally in our hiring program. And an apprenticeship program allows us to hire in folks that otherwise wouldn't get an opportunity for these jobs and get them started on a career that we all know is extremely lucrative, beneficial. It's not going away anytime soon. So you're not going to be the corporal that holds the horse for the general, and all of a sudden the general's not on a horse anymore. Cyber's going to be around for our career and several more generations. So we wanted to help with that aspect. We also knew that we needed to grow more talent. We couldn't afford to buy all the talent. Somewhere in there, you have to build some of the talent. And apprenticeship was a very natural fit to me because of my military time, where we do the exact same thing. If you think about how we train cyber individuals up in the military, at least in the Air Force, 18-year-old kid joins the Air Force, takes a test, scores well on that aptitude test, gets selected for cyber. We send them to 4 or 5 months of training to be able to spell cyber. Then they join their unit as an apprentice. And while they're there, they do on-the-job training. And that takes 18, 24 months before they become a journeyman. So I was already used to the program. It was just such a natural fit for me that I didn't even think twice about it.
I always reflect on my own military time and think I was 18 years old and military police, and went to AIT and got sent to Germany, and they said, here's a car, here's a gun, you're going to go enforce laws in our military installation as a 18-year-old kid. And it's just it's a surreal thing to think about, but applicable in this space, especially around, there's, if you could tie it to a skill that you could teach somebody in a short period of time, it eliminates some of the credentialing and other aspects that I think corporate America has a tendency to get caught up on, right? Where you can
Mhm.
do these things without a 4-year education. And this isn't necessarily, please don't take it as a college is bad. College is a fantastic option for individuals, so that's a pathway. But there are more and more ways in which somebody can break into this space. Um, what advice would you give to employers out there that are looking, that are, they're slamming their head in the desk as we speak, and just trying to think through, man, like, this is what we're doing isn't working. We need to change something. What would you recommend that they could start out in an easy way to go out and make changes in their hiring process?
Hmm. Well, first, go back to all those roles that you have and how specific are your job descriptions, and have you actually tiered them so you have an ability to understand that this is my entry level talent, this is my more advanced talent. You really got to do that homework first so that you can have an honest conversation with your HR department, your recruiters, or if you're really small and you don't have any of that, you have Joe or Susie does all of that for you, then so you can properly advertise for that talent. And then benchmark that against what your industry typically pays, because it's not just what is the going rate for a firewall engineer, but if you're in an industry that can't afford to pay the same as Google or CrowdStrike or somebody like that, then you need to understand that, and you need to scope your intentions and your appetites accordingly. I'm in government healthcare business, so we have to operate on tighter margins than some folks do. But some companies have huge margins, and they can pay for as much talent as they can possibly hoover up. And everybody's somewhere in between those left and right boundaries. So you really got to set your expectations in a realistic point so you can actually start to move forward.
Yeah, I don't think there's one size fits all in this, and it's really hard to take that mindset, especially with the desire to look at diverse candidates and maybe outside the box candidates. It wouldn't be just that traditional college student. You have to, I think, do what you just recommended, and really lean into some of those non-traditional pathways to hit some of those goals. We have 3 minutes left, and so I always like to end our live sessions with what advice would you give to those listening. We had a good turnout here. A lot of your recruiters in the talent acquisition. So much love to the Centene recruiters, and appreciate all you guys do every day for the team there. But what advice would you give for to maybe those listening? Maybe to break into cyber, that they would do.
If you are trying to get your first job in cyber, definitely find a group, whether it's CyberUp or some other similar group, that can get you that basic understanding and training. The Security Plus certification is really that benchmark across our industry today. That could change tomorrow, but today that's the one that says you understand what cyber is, you understand the terms, the basic technologies. I'm not a huge proponent of certs overall, because certs are tests. You study, you take the test. But for entry level, that's important. You need to be able to prove to the hiring manager that you can at least get along in the job the first few months while you learn the rest of the trade. And if you can't do that, if you can't prove that to the recruiter and to the hiring manager, then they're not going to have that faith in you. And then don't be afraid to take an adjacent job. If you can't get into the security operations center right off the bat with the company, do they have an IT help desk? Can you get a job in the IT help desk, and then you're now an internal hire? And when a job comes open on that security operations center, you can apply for it and you're a known entity. Sometimes you have to go that long route. One of my sons did that in the insurance business. He had to sell insurance for a year in a call center before he could get a claims adjusting job. So sometimes you have to invest.
It's I chuckle, right? There aren't many people that are sitting in roles like yours that had this traditional projection, right? There wasn't a cybersecurity degree when you got into this. There wasn't a thing, and so we haven't hit I think the point as a country where we have CISOs that have, did that traditional pathway. Many of them did start in, IT adjacent roles or help desk type of roles, and then learned and grew within their functions. So, and what better way to learn all the ins and outs of an organization, right? To understand all the things that are part of it. So, in wrapping up, one, thank you so much for your time today, Alan. Two, we have another great guest next week. Erica Wilson from RJ is going to be joining us, and we'll have a continuation of today's discussion, right? So this week we really looked at the we dabbled a little bit with the individual side, but we leaned into the employer side. But next week we're going to talk about just different pathways into cybersecurity, which is an important topic. There isn't a one size fits all. I think one thing that makes it really hard to break into this space is there are so many different job functions within cybers. How do you pick the right one, or where do I go from here? So we're going to dive into that next week with Erica. So really looking forward to that discussion. And Alan, as always, thank you for your leadership within CyberUp and the organization. I think leadership, you're a pillar of the St. Louis community within the cybersecurity community, and I think a testament really of just the collaboration and effort that happens across the region. And I think beyond just St. Louis, even nationally, because I know you're interacting with peers all across the country. And it's good to know that we have leaders like yourself kind of driving some of this forward. And for me, it gives a light at the end of the tunnel that there is hope, right? That, the 755,000 jobs that are out there, we hit a point that, we're getting closer to full employment maybe at some point. I don't know if we ever get there, but maybe we get a little closer. But appreciate your time today.
No problem, Tony. It was a pleasure.
Thank you guys. So this time, tune in next week and looking forward to it. Thank you so much.